Okay. Good afternoon. It's great to see so many of you here today. My name is Troy Swanson. I'm the Library Department Chair. Welcome to this event. This academic year, we are looking for our One Book, One College program at a book called Disability Visibility. This book is about disability community, about advocacy for disability. I'm talking about different kinds of disability. It's been a really excellent program from the fall, and we're continuing this spring. A lot of great voices lifting up. So this continues that conversation. Today's a little bit different focus around that conversation about legislation around disability. And just this week, actually, Governor J.B. Pritzker signed into law the Dignity in Pay Act. This is an act that has to do with sub-minimum wage for folks with disabilities. We're going to learn what that act is about and why it's important today, so I won't spoil that. But to help us understand this act, we are very grateful to welcome Representative Theresa Ma. So Theresa, thank you for coming here today. Representative Ma represents the 24th District in the Illinois House, which is roughly on the near south side, like Chinatown-ish area. Does not go into Moraine Valley's district, but let me say Representative Ma is a good friend of community colleges and higher education, and so we're happy to have her on campus today to speak about this act and to share her time. To make this happen, I'll not block our students here, sorry guys. We are going to have an interview style event with our editors from our student magazine, Velocity, and we're really glad they're prepped and ready to rock and roll, so thank you for that. Let me introduce Phoebe Hodge, who's our news editor, Sean Fye, who's our political editor, Annie Gregg, who's the assistant political editor, and Juan Carbajal, who is the opinion editor. And so thank you all. Thank you to Lisa Couch, who is our journalism faculty member who helped prep for this event. And just as a reminder, Velocity is published monthly online at mvccvelocity.com. These are our journalism students working their craft, and they do an excellent job covering our campus and talking about issues, so I invite you all to visit and take a look. So with that, I will stop talking. Thank you all for your time. Thank you all for being here. I will turn it over to our students.
Hello, everybody. As Troy said, my name is Sean Fye. I'm the political editor at Velocity. First off, on behalf of Velocity, we wanted to thank Representative Ma for being here. We want to thank her for her time and congratulate her because Governor J.B. Pritzker just signed the Dignity in Pay Act into law 2 days ago on January 21st. So congratulations, Representative Ma.
Well, hello, Representative Ma.
Hello.
So one of the first things I was thinking is if you could just give like a brief overview of what your, what has been your journey as a representative and getting into politics, just to let people kind of know who aren't in the know.
Okay. Yeah. So I just got sworn into my 5th term last week or 2 weeks before, and in the Illinois House, we serve 2-year terms. So I've been in the legislature for 8 years now. And the cool thing is, when I first got elected, I actually became the first Asian American elected to the Illinois General Assembly. And that's in the state's almost 200-year history at that time. Now we have 9 Asian Americans in the legislature, 8 in the House and 1 in the Senate. And, that does help us approach, parity in our population, because in Illinois, Asian Americans make up about 6% of the state population. And, for the last 2 decades, we were the fastest growing population in the state. And so, it took a long time, but, it was something that was a really important part of my journey because, I actually grew up in California, and it was much more common to see people who look like myself in positions of public office and in elected office. And so, when I came to Illinois originally, a million years ago, I came here to get into a PhD program at the University of Chicago. The first part of my career was actually in higher education. I got a PhD, and then I taught at the college level for a number of years. But then my career took a shift, a major shift in trajectory, and I ended up working in the community, advocating for resources and policy that would be beneficial to the community that I lived in, and that I didn't see any representation for in the legislature, right? So I worked for an advocacy organization and pushed for policy that would be beneficial to the community, knowing that there wasn't somebody doing that work who had an official position in the legislature. And then at one point, my predecessor decided that, he was going to retire. And, as long as he was in that position, it's really hard to beat an incumbent, so, he was a barrier to any change in representation. But he announced his retirement, and he wanted to have his son replace him, pretty common in Chicago politics or Illinois politics, the whole nepotism arrangement. He was going to try to make that happen. But, I saw the opportunity, and I didn't really think he did a good job as my state representative, and so I doubted that his son was going to be any different, especially since he didn't have the experience. And so, I made my case. I knocked on a lot of doors, introduced myself to neighbors and community members, and just put myself out there in this run to represent that district. And at the time, it was still a challenge. I was the underdog, somebody that's been in the news lately. Speaker Madigan, he was in charge of a lot of the politics and would, give some people an advantage. And he had endorsed my opponent, the son of my predecessor. And so I had to, work doubly hard to get my name out there and convince people that, I would do a better job representing them. But essentially, that's how I became a state representative. That was part of my journey. I put together a multicultural, multilingual campaign because the area I represent is predominantly immigrant communities, both Latino and Asian American. And so I had to get the information out there in Spanish and Chinese as well as English. And I got the volunteers together to do that and put together a campaign that was representative of the community that I wanted to serve. And so that's how I got elected in 2016.
Okay, very nice. Thank you. And then going from representing, most of your community to representing a community that's, existing throughout, everywhere really, and is talking about not just representing them, but also making sure that you can reflect that their experiences in real life, in the real world. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Dignity in Pay Act is?
Yeah, so the Dignity in Pay Act, which finally passed last year after I worked on it for the past 7 years, right? From the time that I was in my first term until last year when it passed both the House and the Senate. It was a bill that was brought to me by a former colleague of mine when I worked in Governor Quinn's office. So I, spent a couple years working for former Governor Pat Quinn. And one of my colleagues, that I was friends with, brought me this proposal, because I guess I was the closest person he had in the legislature to, and thought that I would be a good chief sponsor for this bill. And so what it was a proposal to eliminate the use of these 14C waivers. That's what they're called. They're from the U.S. Department of Labor that would give a company or an organization approval to pay people with disabilities lower than the minimum wage. And, this is something from way back in 1938 when, veterans were coming home from combat and they, had a physical disability, and it was something that would encourage business to employ them, and was basically an incentive, for the businesses. And, our society has advanced so much since that time, with various services and programs for people with disabilities, that, it was just kind of a throwback, right? It was something that needed to be changed. And we wanted to be one of 17 states that had already moved away from using those waivers. So, Illinois, still had a lot of businesses and programs that applied for these waivers and therefore, paid people with a disability lower than the minimum wage. And, it was just, something that seemed like its time had come. We needed to figure out a way to move away from that approach, because it was kind of like this, one-size-fit-all approach that didn't acknowledge that, there were different kinds of disabilities, that, people had potential beyond, what was available for them, and that, they shouldn't be limited to these jobs that paid below the minimum wage, just because, this waiver still existed and our state hadn't banned them. So, so in a nutshell, that's what it was. And when I first filed the bill back in 2017 or 2018, it was at a time when the state was debating about the increase in the state minimum wage. And that was a big fight that took a lot of effort to get passed. And so the discussion about this bill kind of, got conflated with that. And so there was a lot of opposition, not only, from people who were against increasing the minimum wage in general, but then also organizations that kind of depended on, this ability to pay people less in order to continue. And, even charitable organizations, right? So like one of the organizations at the very beginning that was vehemently opposed, and they were based in the city of Chicago, was Misericordia Bakeries, right? So, they have this, charitable organization where they use the labor of people with disabilities to make their product, and they sell it for charity. And, it just, it seemed, really contradictory, right? To have this charitable organization that serves people with disabilities continue to insist that, it was okay to pay them less than everyone else. But, as the bill process moved forward, we were able to make changes to the bill to accommodate, some needs of organizations that did have legitimate concerns and wanted to be able to stay in business to be able to continue to serve their populations. And also in 2019, the city of Chicago changed their ordinance to phase out the use of sub-minimum wage. So opposition from organizations that were based in Chicago, like Misericordia, were no longer relevant when we filed the bill again.
Okay, and considering the work that you've done and just considering what the 14C exemption is and how other organizations have used it, for people to pay people with disabilities this sub-minimum wage, I was wondering what's the lowest wages that you've seen, and what exactly are, if you have any sort of rationality that organizations use in order to back it up.
Yeah. So we saw some studies as we were working on this bill, where in these programs called sheltered workshops, the wages were as low as 50 cents an hour, something like that. And their justification was that, well, these are workers that are not as productive as everyone else, and these are folks generally with a developmental disabilities, sometimes very severe, and so they would justify it by saying, well, these are essentially programs that keep them occupied and give them a place to come and provide a social environment. And, that might be true, but I think in some instances what ended up happening was if there's an organization that serves this population, they would have the sheltered workshop rather than, some employment training and assistance programs that also exist that they could have taken advantage of, that have federal matching funds that allow them to pay more and to employ staff and to help folks develop their potential and be trained, not just for independent living, but for employment. And so, the good thing about the bill that we ended up passing was that it provides technical assistance and funding for the transition process for some of these organizations so that they could begin to rely more on these other programs that are more beneficial to people, that try to understand what people's needs are, what they can help with to find people a placement or a job that fits their specific needs. So they're more tailored, and in some instances would provide a personal assistant to help people either with transportation or with certain requirements that would help them get to work on time or to their job every day. So these were programs that didn't necessarily exist or weren't conceived of in 1938 when the sub-minimum wage 14C certificates or waivers were invented. But one of the outcomes of the passage of this legislation is that it's sort of helping organizations transition to a new way of doing things. And some of that transition has already happened, right? We got a lot of support from organizations that had already begun to employ these other programs and processes. But change is difficult sometimes. And, there were organizations that were opposed to our bill because they like to do things the way that they've always done them, and didn't really want to go through the process of transforming their approach or their organization, or altering the contracts that they had with companies that employed their program participants. So that's a source of some of the opposition and some of the justification that people had. And if you were there for some of the committee hearings, or read the transcript or watch the video, you could see some of the organizations testify against the bill, they brought program participants with them, and in a way, sort of made arguments that were easily refuted because we could point to the existence of organizations that had already made the transition, or training, employment training and preparation programs that already exist at the state and actually included more funding than these organizations currently had. So.
Yeah, going along with the opposition, I was just about to ask you, so the vote on this bill was 43-11, and a lot of the concerns for the bill was that they wouldn't be able to afford, these sheltered work programs weren't going to be able to afford paying minimum wage. For example, Senator Chapin Rose said, "I can't vote for a bill no matter how well-intentioned it is, because I know it's going to send up pink slips in my area." So how would you address some of those concerns about potential unemployment problems?
Well, so, I think that his opposition was based on, one particular model of providing those contracts with sheltered workshops, right? And there was a sheltered workshop that testified at that very same committee hearing that, the way they did it was, okay, so they had a contract with a company that actually paid minimum wage, but the organization paid less to the worker and pocketed the difference to support their program. And, so there was a study that, somebody sent me a copy of this study that just came out recently, and I'll make sure that I can, I'll share that with you. But they found that with the new model that's supported by our bill and, currently already exists, people with disabilities who are able to take advantage of those, workforce development programs, and employment assistance, right? So there's two parts to it. The training, to apply for jobs in the integrated workforce, and then also the placement portion, right? So, and then there's also funding for personal assistance that can help the person with disabilities. So there's federal matching funds for those programs, and the outcome is that there's a higher rate of employment for people with disabilities that take advantage of these programs, right? So instead of thinking of, okay, well, these for-profit companies that are, getting permission to pay less than the minimum wage, or paying an organization that takes a cut of the wages, it actually is helpful to have, these supportive employment programs be able to help people who have the ability to get employment in the integrated workforce to do that. And, we've seen, folks that, like in my community, I've seen like a lot of these folks, working at Mariano's, making the same minimum wage as everyone else. And, I don't know that it's necessarily true that, I think it's that, these companies don't have as much opportunity to take advantage of this system that benefits them. you know, with regard to folks with severe developmental disabilities, so there's a provider in my district, it's called El Valor. They provide bilingual and culturally specific services for, folks with disabilities, developmental disabilities. They've transitioned away from the sheltered workshop model, long ago. They don't pay sub-minimum wage. But they use this option so they have the employment training programs for those that can take advantage of those. But there are also program participants, with severe disabilities, who may not be a good fit for the competitive workforce. And so they can take advantage of these programs, these day programs, where, they opt to, do whatever activities they want to do. And they give their participants the option of, well, today, do you want to go to, the field museum or, or the park, the library? Do you want to do artwork? So that's an option where, they can spend their time how they want, with their peers and continue to socialize, but they don't have to work for pennies on the dollar, right? And at the same time, part of the bill increases the personal needs allowance. So, they have a little stipend, they can bring some money home. They can save, they can put money into the savings account or, whatever their needs are. We increase the amount for that. And El Valor, what they told me they actually, distribute their personal needs allowance to their participants as if it's a paycheck. So, it's a much better system.
And I would also just like to say that, this is an incredible opportunity to perhaps maybe get to know some of these organizations that impact so many parts of our community. And I think that harkens to a really great point that even, families or members of our community with disabilities, sometimes maybe they just don't know which options are out there. And my family has definitely had that experience. My aunt's actually 60 years old, and when she was born, she was told that she probably had no other place besides an institution. She's worked in her community for decades now at this point. Is there a message you'd like to give for members of the community who have that experience, who maybe have been, facing long-standing barriers and misconceptions about their own abilities?
Yeah, so, one of the great things about policymaking is that you can update people's outlook on things, the way the culture operates, right? So it's true, 40, 50 years ago, this was the predominant idea that if you're born with a disability, you're going to be institutionalized. That was the only option in many cases, and it was the expectation, right? But our society has evolved so much since then, and there are all kinds of programs that exist now that didn't exist before. And we've moved away from the idea that institutionalizing people, is the best approach to addressing people with disabilities. And now, there's been many decades of movement towards independent living, or care within the community, with family members, and these supportive employment programs, where people are encouraged to find employment in the competitive workplace. That helps. Well, so it really focuses more on helping people achieve their potential and acknowledging that people have value. And it's, we're not about, throwing people away in an institution anymore, that's an outmoded approach that really doesn't help, right? And that, and so, we have to update our policies to reflect what's possible now. And, one of the young women who spoke at the bill signing, she acknowledged exactly this. She works for an organization at Wrigley Field, at Cubs games, and I think it was just very moving to be able to acknowledge, look, this is possible, and we should focus on people's potential and not, putting people in a one-size-fit-all approach, because not everybody's the same, and we should figure out, how we develop people's potential and make sure that they're paid, that their paycheck reflects their value, right? And that they're not less value or, less valued than anybody else.
Right, and that's definitely is so important. And I imagine that in that conversation, it probably involved working with a lot of different organizations that, maybe you weren't as familiar with. We're very familiar here at Moraine with Access Living Chicago, which we know was a really important part of this act. Could you maybe speak a little bit to the insights that they provided and kind of maybe how they helped to, shape this act and the way it was going to roll out?
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned, one of the biggest advocacy organizations that helped us pass this bill. Another one was the Illinois Association of Rehab Facilities, IARF. So they're a membership organization that includes a lot of the facilities that work with people with developmental disabilities. Access Living is actually an organization not only focused on advocacy, but they're also a center for independent living. So they do a lot of the training for, folks to be able to live on their own, and they provide the resources so that, people can, understand, how to access resources from the government, what programs exist, I think it's really powerful to see these organizations come together behind a bill, and since they represent larger entities, rather than individuals, sometimes that has more sway, when I'm trying to talk to my colleagues about the importance of a particular bill. So, they want to know what organizations like that, or Special Olympics, which was also one of the proponents of the bill. So when Special Olympics, which, is a well-known organization, when they take a stand and, they make their position known, and usually, this happens during one of the committee hearings, either in the House or the Senate, right? The bill has to pass through both chambers, and it's a similar process where, once the bill gets filed, it'll be sent to a committee that will provide a public hearing for it, and the committee usually considers bills of, similar subject matter, right? So, at the committee hearing, the chair will read out a list of, who signed up as a proponent and who signed up as an opponent, so the positions are publicly known and available. This is part of the public process of, passing legislation. And so when an organization like Access Living or IARF or Special Olympics, states their position on a bill. It really helps because it allows, my colleagues to understand the organized force behind the bill. So, having an individual, so if you sign a witness slip in support, it's great, because I want everybody to know that you have the ability to state for the public record, your position on a particular piece of legislation, right? At that point, they're all proposals, right? And if you like the idea, if you like the proposal, and you want to state that publicly, you can, right? So before any hearing on any bill, just look on ilga.gov, right? That's the website that where you can see all of our proceedings. It's all transparent, open for research, investigation, public sharing or whatever. You can sign up and put your name on there, and that's great. But when an organization that has membership across the entire state, when they publicly list their name as a proponent, it's much more powerful, right? My colleagues will look at that and say, oh, wow, that means that, there are people in my district who will see that and, support as well, because it's a really powerful entity that's gotten behind it. So, it's taken the support of all these organizations to find people to testify at the hearings, find additional witness slips, people to sign as a proponent rather than an opponent. And, sometimes those are campaigns where, you'll get an email. If you're a member of that organization or you're on their email list, they'll send out a blast that says, oh, the hearing's coming up, and, please call your legislator and let them know about your support, or fill out a witness slip. Those organized efforts go a long way in helping a bill pass. And Access Living, they have a policy, a staffer who's in charge of policy and organizing, who in this case, he happened to be one of my constituents, but he was down in Springfield, for all of these efforts, talking individually to my colleagues, to, some of them were on the fence because they might have organizations in their district that were opposed, legislators try to listen as much as possible to their voters, right? Because, our jobs depend on it. And so it's just a matter of, getting more folks from your side to communicate and convince the legislator that this is a good, this is a safe vote to take, that it won't jeopardize, your reelection if you support this. And, sometimes that's what it takes. It can sometimes go beyond the issue itself and the right or wrong of it. And you have to get the right people to send the message to the legislator that, hey, this is a good idea for you to vote on this.
And I'm sure also as well, in the aftermath of getting it passed as well, I know there's a task force that will be participating in the future of all of this getting passed, and working up until 2029 to help businesses and organizations make that transition.
Yes.
Do you think that groups like Access Living will play a big role in helping that transition go smoothly in the future?
Yes, absolutely. That organization, and as I mentioned before, IARF, which is a federation of all the different organizations that serve people with disabilities, so part of the process of negotiating this bill and getting it to a state where, most of my colleagues could vote yes on it was agreeing to expand the membership of this EEOPD, so this basically advisory council that already exists, and the one that will be writing up the process and sort of, figuring out the best way forward, right? So we had to expand the membership to include more representation from these organizations that specifically serve people with developmental disabilities, because they were the ones that tend to run these sheltered workshops, and they were the ones that tended to be opposed because they were afraid of how their organizations would change and how that would affect the families. So the quote that you shared earlier with Senator Chapin Rose, that was repeated over and over again. A lot of families were fearful that, okay, well, these sheltered workshops are going to disappear and we won't have any place to take our kids. And, I think that our objective was to make sure there was enough representation from those types of organizations so that, they knew that we were taking their concerns seriously, that we didn't want to move forward in a way that didn't take into account their concerns, and we wanted to, have a plan that would include their input as much as possible.
Considering the bipartisan support the bill got and the support from organizations like Access Living and like Special Olympics, how do you keep this momentum going? And what is on the agenda next for Illinois as it pertains to disability rights?
Well, so I think there was a lot of energy in the room on Tuesday during the bill signing. The advocacy community is very tight-knit and, prepared to continue working. I think that, there have been discussions that I've already had with some folks who are experts on autism, for example. And so, they were telling me about an issue that the autism community faces, where there aren't enough professionals who are able to give an official diagnosis to the families early enough to provide intervention, because this is something where, the earlier you intervene with speech therapy and intervention, the better the outcomes for the individuals. And in order to get those services, especially if you're low income, or, especially if you're, in my case, a lot of the folks I represent are from immigrant families that face language and cultural barriers, right? So getting that diagnosis early is beneficial to the families in so many ways, and to the individuals as well, because it can lessen the symptoms and make people, more able to be high functioning later on. But, there's a huge disparity if, you're from a low income community, or you face these barriers with language or culture. It's almost impossible to get access to these diagnoses at the right time. And so, that's something that I'm interested in working on, because it was brought to me by one of the organizations in my district that serves this population. And the advocate who brought it to my attention is an expert, on autism, and, made these observations and wanted to share with me, how how difficult it is for families to understand what services are available, how to access them, how to knit things together and get the right information, because sometimes it's available in all different places and you don't necessarily know where to go for the information. And so the person I talked to told me about how things work in other states, like in California. There's kind of a one-stop shop, you know, where families can go to one place and be connected to the services that they need. Or in New York, where the intervention services are much more available. You know, there are more hours that are available through Medicaid or you know, somehow just more generous with the amount of time that's available, you know, because it comes at a cost too, right? The requirement for the number of hours is much higher in New York as compared to Illinois, where it's like 15 minutes a week or something like that, and you know that really isn't helpful. So you know that's something that I'm interested in working on. You know, and because I've developed these relationships with advocacy organizations, that you know that's a way to continue the momentum and to continue this work. But I also have colleagues that are already working on other aspects of disability rights, and there's actually a lot that needs to be done. So I think, you know, now that we've, you know, completed this project or sort of, you know, gotten this out of the way in a sense, you know, there can be more attention devoted to some of the other needs.
Speaking to that momentum, Illinois is now one of 19 states to pass a law like this. How do you kind of carry it to a federal level? What do you do on a federal level to continue disability advocacy?
Yeah, so there has already been some efforts to remove the 14C waiver from the Department of Labor, and that work was started, you know, under the Biden administration. Senator Duckworth from Illinois has been very involved in that. So, you know, I hope that we can continue with that effort, and the fact that it is bipartisan, hopefully that won't interrupt the progress that's being made there. But there's also a threat to Medicaid programs and funding under the current administration, and that might stymie some of our efforts. So, you know, it's a mixed bag in terms of, you know, what the outlook is, because, you know, so Medicaid programs vary from state to state, and Illinois has been a state that has expanded Medicaid, but Medicaid relies on federal funds to match state funds in order to keep it going, right? And so there are efforts now or discussions that we've heard about under the current administration to make massive cuts to Medicaid, which would affect the, you know, healthcare access to a lot of, you know, people with disabilities and low-income folks. And, you know, that's a huge concern because, you know, we're one of the more advanced states in terms of, you know, making the best use of our Medicaid programs and, you know, making sure that, you know, people who are eligible take advantage of it and make use of it. And so, you know, in the discussions about retribution to states like ours, because, you know, we've been immigrant friendly, or, you know, we promote diversity and things like that. There have been discussions about how the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois can be targets, for retaliation because of the policy positions that we have. And one of the ways they could do that is to retract Medicaid funding. So it's a big concern, and I'm not sure what's going to happen with that, but my hope is that we can get this subminimum wage removed at the federal level, and that that can match what we've been doing at the state level. But yeah, I don't have the answers. I don't have a crystal ball. I just hope that we can continue with that progress, because the 18 states. I mean, it's been a bipartisan effort in a lot of these states, and so I hope that it can continue that way, and that it won't affect what's happening at the federal level.
Actually, how were you able to kind of rally and get bipartisan support? Like, what were the things that you had to do to kind of get that support? Yeah,
so in the House, like I said, it's been a long road, right? I mentioned before how, during the initial hearing, we got the opposition from Misericordia, and as well as the people who were against raising the minimum wage in Illinois. And then the second time around, when we filed the bill again more recently, one of the strongest opponents was one of my colleagues, Republican colleagues downstate, whose family, or let me see, I think, so there's a provider in his district that was strongly opposed, and he strongly identified with that organization, and continued his opposition, but with the provisions that we added to the new version of the bill, things like increasing the personal needs allotment, as well as the transition funding that we were promising the providers, and the fact that these training programs and job placement programs provided federal matching dollars, and that organizations currently using 14C certificates didn't have access to, right? So I think we just made it more attractive to them, help them understand that the organization would have access to more funding, if it shifted to a different approach. And so, we ended up having a discussion with that legislator and the Republican leader, so the minority leader in the House, and basically struck a deal, right? We made a negotiation so that we extended the ramp, so the phase-out period, an additional year to 2029, and included some extra representation for those organizations in the EEOPD task force. So we had to have these discussions that that convinced people that it wasn't as bad as they were making out to be.
Actually, what did it feel like? Because I remember you mentioning like the energy in the room, or the energy when the bill was signed. Like, how did it feel as a legislator? But like, how did it feel to see all of your work and the work of so many other advocates? How did it feel to see it come to fruition?
It was great. Tuesday was a great day. because there were many moments when I almost lost hope because the vote, so in the House, the bill came up for a vote and originally was short by 3 votes. So it had to go, I had to withdraw it from the record and ask for postponed consideration, because if your vote goes to the, your bill goes to the floor and there's a vote on it and it comes within 10 votes of passing, you can ask to withdraw it and have another chance. But there was only one other chance, right? And so when I brought it back again, you know, we had been having conversations, and, you know, you have to keep a running tally of who's for and against. We had talked to a lot of people. The original time that it came up for a vote, you know, we try not to bring something up for a vote until we know, you know, we have to count our votes, right? And keep track of, like, you know, who's for it and who's against. But that was during a period when there were a lot of absences. And so we came up 3 votes short because people weren't on the floor to vote for it. And, you know, so I had to withdraw it and ask for it to go on postponed consideration and then bring it back again when I knew that there were enough people in the chamber and enough of the people that said they would vote yes, you know, to be there to vote yes. And so, you know, it was an emotional roller coaster because I had to go through a lot of that. There were, you know, some tense moments with colleagues who just refused to consider, you know, our point of view or our argument about the benefits of passing this bill. You know, so for 2 years during the last term, you know, I was not sure about the passage of the bill. And so when it finally passed Senate, you know, I was at that hearing that you mentioned. And then my Senate colleague, who happens to be my Springfield roommate, you know, she was able to pass it on the floor of the Senate, you know, and this was during lame duck session. So just a few weeks ago in early January, because, wait, no, was it veto session? Or I'm kind of forgetting exactly the sequence of events, but, you know, there was a small window during which it could happen. And, you know, when I passed it out of the House in May, we adjourned for the summer, and we didn't have a guarantee that they were going to call it in the Senate. A lot of times bills will die, even if it's passed one chamber, if the other chamber declines to call it for a vote. And so we didn't have a guarantee that it was going to happen, but it eventually did happen during veto session, and it was a relief. So yeah, I felt elation and relief that it was finally done.
I imagine as well, you know, I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with hearing about political gridlock. You know, we hear about it on a local level and also on a federal level for sure. And I know you're probably tired of experiencing it at times. Do you have anything, maybe in particular with this bill, anything that you keep in mind, maybe to keep your motivation, any, you know, personal, you know, calling card that you keep to, you know, keep you motivated?
Well, I will say that, you know, the gridlock is not necessarily as bad in the state legislature as we've seen it in Congress. And I think that, you know, in the coming term, we're probably going to see more gridlock. But because I'm a member of the majority party in the legislature in Illinois, it helps. You know, things tend to move along better. But then there are these issues that are difficult because they don't necessarily fall along partisan lines, and it's a complex issue. But I've been in the legislature long enough that I tell my colleagues that are newer that sometimes it does take many years and many terms to pass a bill. But you have to be in it for the long haul. I think it's such a privilege to be able to do this kind of work in the General Assembly because it makes structural change. And when a bill passes the House and the Senate and then gets signed by the governor, it affects potentially 13 million people across the state of Illinois, right? That's our state population. And state legislation, it's statewide policy, right? We do this every year. There are hundreds of bills, thousands that get filed, hundreds that get passed, and these bills affect a lot of people. But it's also a responsibility. It's a huge responsibility to think that you're making rules basically for millions of people. But we do that with the budget as well, right? So every year we have to pass a state budget, and this past year it was like $50 million. No, wait, sorry. Sorry, not million, billion. It's a huge responsibility, but it's also a privilege, and you have a seat at the table. And we were saying before, every day is different, every situation is new, and you have to be cognizant of the chess game. Sometimes it's like 3D chess, that you have to be aware of all the different pieces moving, and things changing. So as I mentioned, when the city of Chicago passed their ordinance in 2019, it sort of changed the landscape for us and made it more possible to pass the bill in Springfield, because it neutralized a big portion of the opposition. So things like that make a difference. And then another big change was that IARF, the organization that I mentioned before, back in 2017, when, I forget if it was 2017 or 18, but it was during my first term, IARF did not have all their membership in support of the bill, and so they couldn't say that they were supportive as an organization. But this time around, they had spent the time talking to their member organizations and having these deep conversations with them. And so, having them in support of the bill and actively working with all the other advocates to pass it, that made a huge difference. So, the pieces can be shifting and changing all the time, and you just have to be aware, stay persistent and keep the faith. And, if it's something that is meaningful to you, stick with it.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that I was kind of wondering, but I feel like you've been kind of answering it in a way, especially lately, was just considering that, with, not to sidetrack or anything, with what's been going on recently in the country with, and we've talked also about gridlock. We're going to see a lot more of that, definitely, and our state of polarization, grows, grows more and more. I was kind of just, and seeing you just detail the democratic process on a local level in detail, I was really just kind of like, how would you, like, what's something that you think people should take from not just I guess from your process of getting this bill and introducing it to make actual needed progress and change, that yeah, if you have any.
Yeah, so what I would say is that, your voice and your engagement is really critical. I would encourage you, if you're interested in this topic today, but, want to know what to take from this, right? I would say, maintaining an awareness of what's going on around you, because you have the power to make a difference in your own community, right? Whether you define that community as this campus, right? There are always opportunities, for example, to engage in the state budget process that happens every year, as I mentioned. And this year I'm going to be on the Higher Education Appropriations Committee. Our General Assembly, like I said, we have to pass the budget every year, and what that means is, we figure out what money comes into the state coffers, through income tax, sales tax, gas tax, fees and fines and things like that. So, there's a bunch of money that comes into the bank account, and then legislators have to decide how we spend that money, right? What's important to the people in the state, our constituents, right? Do we spend that money on healthcare, roads and bridges, higher education? We have to spend a portion of it every year on higher education, on K through 12 public schools, right? On fixing the highways and maintaining, our public buildings, things like that. Our correctional institutions are also paid for by the state. But at what levels, right? Who gets more money, who gets a cut, or do we keep it the same? Those are decisions we make every single year. And it affects you, right? Because you're here. This is a public institution. It gets money from the state of Illinois every year. There's a line item for community colleges. There's a line item for MAP grants, so if you're under a certain income and you still want to obtain a higher education, the state provides some of that funding for you, because we think it's important to have an educated population, and that your family's income level shouldn't be a barrier. But that's only because legislators in Illinois, in response to their constituents, voted for that. Like, that doesn't exist in every state, right? You can basically get, free college education, for the first 2 years in the state of Illinois, and continue and get MAP grant funding for the rest. But, if you lived in another state that doesn't value higher education that way, it wouldn't exist. And that's because we voted for that. And we voted for that because you said it was important, right? So, if there's an opportunity when the budget gets voted on, for you to send a note to your legislator, whether it's the one that represents the college here, or if you live nearby in a surrounding community and it's represented by someone else, get a message to them. Say, hey, I'm a student at Moraine Valley Community College, and it's really important that that I have this opportunity. Keep funding this program, keep providing funding for MAP grants. If you're applying for a 4-year college, and you're gonna you want to move on to U of I, there's funding that's provided by the state of Illinois. And so, you have to speak up and say, hey, that's really important. And I wouldn't be able to go to college without that. So please fund that, right? So your voice actually makes a difference, whether it's on this issue or, some other issue that, we're voting on. As I said, ilga.gov is the website where you can look up all the bills that are filed, all the committees that are being scheduled, and what bills are being heard in those committees. I would say that advocacy is, it's important, and that's all of you. And you might also want to connect with either an organization on campus that, organizes trips to Springfield so you can talk to legislators, because that's your state capital, right? It's not some rarefied place that you don't belong in and it's only for legislators. I mean, quite the opposite. You're supposed to come down there and have a rally and, go to my colleagues' offices and tell them who you are and what's important to you. Like, that's a critical part of our democracy. And, and journalists are a really important part of that too, because, they let you know what's going on. They kind of explain things that are happening behind the scenes. You might not have the time to look at every bill, but, there are State House reporters and, people who cover what's happening in Springfield. And, if you want to stay on top of that, find out what's going on, journalists really help with that, right?
We try.
Yeah, I'd say so.
But, the disability issue, there are all kinds of advocacy organizations on every single issue. Find out how you can be engaged with them, because they can really help. They've been doing this. That's their number one priority, right? They're advocating for bills and getting things through the legislative process. And so, if they're having a rally down in Springfield, and you're on their mailing list, they'll send out the invitation and say, hey, we have buses leaving on this day, at this hour, and, join us. Because when my colleagues and I look out on the rotunda and it's packed with people on a particular issue, that's really powerful. It's really powerful. You can't underestimate the power of organized people, right? That's, sometimes we get discouraged because they're, oligarchs and, special interests that are, throwing a lot of money into their issues, their campaigns. But organized people can be just as powerful.
Okay, that's going to wrap things up. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you to Representative Ma.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.